You think you know the most dangerous job in the ancient world. You picture a gladiator. Sand, swords, a roaring crowd waiting for blood. That image is wrong, and it's wrong in a way that should bother you. The real answer was quieter. It happened underground, in the dark, and almost nobody who did it lived long enough to tell you about it. Let's start with the myth, because the myth is useful. Gladiators feel like the obvious choice. Violent spectacle, public death, an entire industry built around risk. But here's the thing historians have known for a while now. Gladiators were expensive. Training one took months, sometimes years. A dead gladiator was a financial loss, not a good outcome for the people who owned him. So most fights didn't end in death. Estimates from surviving records suggest somewhere around 1 in 5 bouts ended that way, not the bloodbath we imagine. Rome protected its investments. Which raises the obvious question. If not the arena, then where? The answer is mining. Specifically, silver and gold mining, and specifically, mining worked by slaves who were never expected to survive it. This wasn't a fringe operation. It was one of the engines of the ancient economy, and almost nobody talks about it, because there's no arena, no crowd, no drama you can paint on a vase. Just tunnels. Take the silver mines at Laurion, southeast of Athens. This is well documented, not speculation. Archaeologists have mapped over 100 kilometers of ancient galleries there, some cut so low that a grown man could only work lying on his side, hacking at rock by oil lamp light with no ventilation and no way out except the same shaft he came in through. The Athenian historian Xenophon wrote about Laurion in the 4th century BC, describing it as a source of endless wealth for the city. He was right about the wealth. He said far less about the people who extracted it, because in his world, they barely counted as people at all. Here's your first shock. That silver funded the Athenian navy. When a rich vein was struck at Laurion in 483 BC, the statesman Themistocles convinced Athens not to hand the windfall out to its citizens, but to build warships instead. Those ships, built with mine money, went on to help defeat the Persian fleet at Salamis a few years later, a battle historians often credit with saving Greek civilization from Persian conquest. Democracy, philosophy, the entire Athenian golden age you've heard about since school. Underwritten, quite literally, by men worked to death in the dark. Sit with that for a second. The birthplace of Western thought was subsidized by a mine that nobody survived working in for long. Before we go further, a quick decode. When historians say gallery in a mining context, they just mean a tunnel, a horizontal passage cut through rock. Nothing artistic about it. And when they say vein, they mean a thin seam of ore running through stone, the whole reason anyone was down there in the first place, chasing a line of silver sometimes no wider than your finger. Keep those two words in mind, because they explain almost everything about why these mines were so lethal. Chasing a narrow vein means cutting narrow tunnels. Narrow tunnels mean no room to stand, no room to turn around, and no real way to escape a collapse. And it gets darker the further east you go. The Greek historian Diodorus Siculus, writing a few centuries later, described the gold mines of Ptolemaic Egypt, out in the eastern desert toward Nubia. He wasn't gentle about it. He described chained laborers, criminals, prisoners of war, worked by torchlight in tunnels barely wide enough for their shoulders, given no rest, no washing, driven forward by overseers who were paid to be cruel. Whether every detail is exact is impossible to verify this far removed, but the outline matches what archaeology has found at desert mining sites like Wadi Hammamat. Barracks with no windows, worn grinding stones, skeletal remains showing the kind of joint damage you only get from repetitive, brutal, unrelenting physical strain, starting young and never letting up. Here's another number worth sitting with. Modern researchers studying the scale of ancient silver production, working backward from the sheer volume of slag, the waste rock left behind at Laurion, have estimated that tens of thousands of laborers may have worked that district at its peak in the 5th century BC. Tens of thousands. Not soldiers, not citizens, not anyone whose name made it into a history book. An entire hidden workforce, roughly the population of a mid-sized ancient city, spending their whole lives underneath one that never had to think about them. And ventilation, as a concept, barely existed. Fires were sometimes lit at the base of shafts just to try to drag a current of air down into the deeper galleries. It rarely worked well enough. Miners breathed dust thick with lead, a byproduct of the silver ore, and lead poisoning back then had no name and no explanation. People just called it what it looked like from the outside. A man getting slower, weaker, and stranger in the head, until one day he stopped coming up at all. Now picture it directly, because this is worth picturing. It's before dawn in the eastern desert, sometime in the 2nd century BC. A boy, maybe 12 years old, is lowered into a shaft on a rope, an oil lamp tied to his wrist because his hands are too small for the wider passages the adults can't fit through. The air down there is thick and used, breathed by a dozen people before him. He can hear hammering somewhere below, rhythmic, endless. He'll spend the next 10 hours filling baskets with crushed rock, passed hand to hand up a human chain, until his arms shake too hard to lift another one. He does not know what year it is by our calendar. He does know, with total certainty, that almost nobody who started this job at his age was still doing it by 30. That's the twist, and it's not a small one. We built an entire modern imagination around gladiators because gladiators left us spectacle. Statues, mosaics, arena ruins you can still walk through and buy a ticket for. Miners left us nothing like that. No monuments, no names carved anywhere, no fan base 2,000 years later. And that absence is exactly why they were more expendable, not less. A gladiator's death was witnessed, priced, sometimes even mourned by fans who liked him. A miner's death was invisible, unrecorded, and instantly replaceable, because there was always another prisoner, another debtor, another captured enemy to send down the same shaft the next morning. The job that actually killed the most people left almost no trace, precisely because nobody with power was watching closely enough to write it down. Here's where it gets uncomfortable in a modern way. We still do this, not with silver mines, obviously, but with the basic pattern. Visible suffering gets attention, funding, outrage, entire movements built around it. Invisible suffering, the kind that happens in supply chains, in warehouses, in places nobody tours or photographs, gets none of that, no matter how much worse it actually is. Think about the last time you were outraged by something you saw versus the last time you were outraged by something you merely knew about, in the abstract, without a face attached. Which one moved you more? Be honest. We haven't really changed the wiring. We just changed the shafts. That's not a guilt trip. It's just an observation about attention and about how thin the line is between known and cared about. Athens got its democracy, its navy, its golden age, and it got to feel good about all of it because the cost was buried literally underground, out of sight of the agora where philosophers debated justice in the open air. Socrates walked those same streets, asking hard questions about virtue and the good life, a few miles from a mine where none of that language applied to anyone. Nobody wrote that contradiction down at the time. Why would they? It wasn't a contradiction to them, it was just how the world worked. Maybe that's the real lesson history keeps handing us, and we keep failing to learn. It's not that ancient people were crueler than us, it's that cruelty is easiest to sustain when it's quiet, unphotographed, and located somewhere you never have to walk past on your way to somewhere nicer. Distance does the moral work that conscience is supposed to do. Put a mine 3 days' walk from the city, and the city gets to keep believing it's civilized. Put a supply chain a continent away, and the same trick still works, just with better shipping. We like to think progress means we'd never allow something like Laurion now. Maybe. Or maybe we've just gotten better at building longer hallways between ourselves and the parts we don't want to see. So the next time someone brings up the most dangerous job in the ancient world, and someone will say gladiator, because that's the story we've been sold for 2,000 years, you'll know better. You'll know it was the silver mines under Laurion and the gold mines out past the Nile, worked by people history didn't bother to name, powering the very civilizations we still study for their wisdom. You think you know the most dangerous job in the ancient world. You don't. It was never the one you could see,